guess I wanted to start off by noting that you just kind of arrived, maybe about a year ago, you just arrived in South Carolina?
About 4 months ago.
Oh, wow.
July 1st, yeah.
Wow. And you're the director of the University of South Carolina School of Library and Information Science?
That's exactly right.
How's it going so far?
It's great. It's on all fronts. The school is fantastic. I have a great faculty, and they're ready to move ahead, and great staff. Amazing alumni, and really enjoying the whole South Carolina experience as well. So it's kind of nice to be able to eat in your shorts in October outside. So.
Any surprises?
Any surprises? Well, you know, you always have the surprises, of course, when you're applying for a job, and then briefly after you've taken it, you turn it into this nice utopian experience. And when you get here, you're like, oh, I guess I have to deal with that. Oh, I've got to deal with that. But all good stuff. And the hurricanes were a bit of a surprise, but you know, other than that.
Yeah, that was a surprise for a lot of us.
Yeah.
Well, they might be coming back around again next season, so maybe it won't be such a surprise moving forward. But I'm interested in how your new position differs from your prior position as Dean Scholar for New Librarianship at Syracuse University's School of Information Studies.
Sure. At Syracuse, I was a professor, and Dean Scholar was just a designation that I was an advisor to the dean on librarianship and such. And so it was pretty straight faculty role, teaching, research, these kinds of things. And in my new role, it's more administrative. So I'm a professor, but as the director of the program, I'm in charge of personnel, I'm in charge of management and budget, those kinds of things. So now I have responsibility as well as, you know, just being able to sit back and think big thoughts.
Ah, okay.
Yesterday, you presented on what you called the Knowledge School. I'd like to know, what is the Knowledge School? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, my dean, this is to be the not screwing up part. The School of Library and Information Science is part of the College of Information and Communications. And my dean jokes that, in fact, we're trying to own the middle of the alphabet between L schools and J schools and L schools and K schools and I schools. But it comes from the idea that I see an evolution from library schools, which were focused primarily on institutions and what it took to staff and man those institutions, to an increased awareness of information within libraries and outside of that context. And I think that we're ready for the next push ahead, which is past the idea that information is some sort of strategic asset or bit of magic that we can pass through a network and technology, and really talk about now what impact are we trying to have, whether that's in a library, whether that's in an organization, a publisher, what have you. And when I think impact, I think knowledge. Not recorded knowledge, materials and things, but how people see the world and understand the world. For me, the goal of library science education, information, professional education, is to help decisions make better decisions. We want to make our community smarter, whether that community is a business or whether that community is a university or locality. And so that really is what people know. We understand that we can send a lot of information at people, around people, collect it, but what they absorb, what they make sense of, how they come to understand their truth and their world, that's where I think the next phase is, which is really about impact. And so the concept of the Knowledge School is to say, what's the next step in evolution? You know, we've done really well with libraries as that information domain has gotten larger with more and more players, where every organization, every discipline is an information discipline. I think we can really focus now on how people utilize information, utilize resources to make a difference, to make better decisions. And so the focus there is on good academia, good research, but impact and service and making it work.
Sounds like it. I think Jim Neal mentioned the notion of servicing information.
Yeah, you know, I'll be honest, as someone with a PhD in information and teaches library and information science, I'm not even quite sure what information is. And so I get, you know, there's lots of formulations. Smarter people than I have tried to do this, from Michael Buckland and John Budd and others. For me, what it comes down to is I want to service people and communities. And when I look at how there are lots of people who want to improve communities. Police want to improve communities. Lawyers want to improve communities. Nursing wants to improve communities. The angle that I think is really important and central to library and information science is knowledge, is how do we learn? Yes, formal settings for education, but how do we learn as a retiree? How do we learn as a CIO? How do we learn as a community member? And so That's the contribution I want to make. I don't think we're servicing information. I think we're servicing our communities and our public.
And when you talk about impact, I'm wondering if there's an element of activism
Oh,
underlying this.
It's not. It's right in front and center.
Okay.
It's not a hidden agenda at all. Activism, advocacy, messaging. It comes down to the fact that we need to make a difference. Right? If you think about for a moment, whether you're an academic library that's taking in a bunch of tuition dollars and overhead funding, whether you're a public library bringing in tax dollars or a school library bringing tax dollars, we affect the communities we're in. Simply having a library is an effect. It takes resources, it takes space, etc. That comes to with my way of thinking as a responsibility. If we're going to impact our society, we better work really hard to make sure we have a positive impact. That means we have to have a sense of what positive means. The concept of being objective or being neutral or being somehow not connected in is, I think, one, a fiction generally, but two, does a disservice. If we believe that reading is important to third graders, that's a point of view, and we need to advocate for that. Whether you do it in read posters or whether you do it through story time and things that really feel nice and comfortable, or whether you do it as the faculty at South Carolina have done by marching down with teachers and children, educators to the State House and say we need to fund literacy education. Advocacy is central to what we do. We advocate on the behalf of our communities. Our communities need access to resources. Our communities need more funding. Our communities need better decision making, et cetera. That advocacy is there. Now, that's different than ideology. That's different than saying all librarians should be conservative Republicans. But we have a suite of things that we feel are important around intellectual property, intellectual honesty, privacy, literacy, and we need to be a societal voice that has an impact and advocates for that at all levels.
Do you think that this shift or evolution of focusing on societal impact and focusing on advocacy is going to make information studies or library and information studies more attractive to a new crop of students?
I do. What we're seeing is a couple of things, sort of looking at general trends around library science education. The first is that we're seeing a younger and younger demographic come in, right? The now by data outdated stereotype of someone coming in for a second career. Someone said, oh, well, I was a great advertising exec banker and I decided to slow down and read a lot. And then they come to library school and they realize, oh, that was a bad assumption. But even that metaphor of going in as a second profession, we're seeing fewer and fewer. We're seeing more and more folks coming right from undergraduate degrees. So the average starting age is under 30 now. And we get a lot of people directly from undergraduates. And when you look at the profile and you ask them why, one, they love technology. They love technology. They're technologically literate. They love humanities. They love the advocacy portion. But the service thing is what brings them into the field. And what I think part of that knowledge school idea is what information schools have done really well is say, these skills, these principles, these values are important to industry. With knowledge, we can say these skills, these are important to industry, sure, but libraries and not-for-profits and governments and et cetera. And so yes, that advocacy is, people want to make a difference. It's the same reason they become nurses and social work and lawyers and doctors. It's the drive to improve our society, to be advocates for their communities.
Speaking of students, what experience should a student expect when they enroll in the Knowledge School?
I think that the couple of things. One, they should understand that they are coming on not as a consumer of a program or a customer of the program or a user of the program. They are coming to join and be part of the program. I think higher education does itself a great disservice when we view our students and as customers. The reason being, if you think about it, the day after you graduate, whether it's an undergraduate degree, a doctorate degree, or a master's degree, you are just about completely dependent on the reputation of the institution that gave you that degree. Right? If you come from some place that people highly respect, you get a good job. If you come from some place not so much, it's going to be harder. 10 years and 20 years out, the reputation of that institution is almost completely dependent on you, what you did. So that important and delicate and complex interweaving of responsibility, of ownership, that's one. It also means in the classroom. We've long ago given up the idea that the professor at the head of a classroom of library science, or frankly, engineering, knows everything about that topic. We know that innovation comes from the Charleston Conference. We know that innovation is happening in these hallways. And so students are coming in, and they are coming in well informed so they can teach the professors. And the professors and students will be learning at the same time, working with alumni. It's a much more complex relationship. So the big thing is to see a knowledge school is a community of people seeking to improve society together. And that means that the status begins to break down. That means the traditional models of 3-credit semester-long things begin to break down. And it becomes much more like we're talking about libraries becoming a hub and a platform for ideas to flow around and move together. And so that sounds very abstract, but it turns into things like internships and practica within courses. It turns into different ways of delivering instruction. It turns into looking at online instruction, not as a convenience, but as a way of increasing diversity of viewpoints and ideas within the classroom. It comes into better relationships and partnerships with libraries and industry and bringing those things about. So it's much more what a student should expect in a knowledge school, frankly what a student should expect in any good program, is to be welcomed as a co-owner of that school and a member of that school.
It also seems that the Knowledge School would prepare people for professions above and beyond traditional librarianship.
Absolutely.
What type of professions would you be looking at? And following up on that, does it mean that the word or the profession of librarianship is passé?
So don't let me forget that second part, because that could be fun. But the first part is, I always give the analogy, because I love, the standard complaint was, oh, we're the only profession that's named after a building. And I said, that's actually not true. If you were an accountant, you used to work in counting houses. I mean, I know it's not quite Christmas time, but our Scrooge is going to come up, and Bob Marley's going to come up, and they were working in counting houses. They were accountants because they counted things. And it used to be that businesses brought all their records and materials to a place to happen. That profession, the businesses began to realize, we need this in our own place. We need better access to it. We need them to worry about our goals, et cetera. And so accounting grew in reputation, in support and finance in places that happen. And I can see that happening in librarianship. We already see it. We have students that do internships at Google. We have students that do internships in all sorts of places. Even look at this conference. If you look at the number of library science and you ask what institutions they're affiliated with, you're probably going to find University of and Library of and Springer and Elsevier, and we have that. And the idea of expanding it even further is important. So one, yes, what we're going to see is that happening at the undergraduate level with information science, but at the master's level and the PhD level. And we're already seeing it. Now, you asked the question about the word, and I work at a school of library and information science. And I have to say, the first question I got when I showed up was, all right, so what are we changing the name of the school to? And I said, no! I love the name of the school. Don't touch it. Apple, Google, Microsoft, Target, all these people would love to have the brand of library. Even if people say, oh, you're obsolete and you're out of date, they even say it out of a sense of love. We have a cachet with that term. People recognize it and they understand it. I have a bachelor's degree in information science. My hardest thing is to convince an 18-year-old to get that degree, because they're like, well, what job do I get? I say, well, you'll be an information scientist. And all they can think is, does that mean I get a lab coat? If I say you're going to be a librarian, they're like, oh, they got it. Right. And so absolutely we should not give up on that terminology. It is not a sense of baggage. It is one that we have invested a great deal of time in improving that reputation. And so it's central and crucial to what we do.
Coming back to the Knowledge School, so yes, it sounds pretty abstract, but it sounds really exciting. And I'm actually kind of jealous. I would have loved something like that, right? So I'd love to know more about how would you describe the curriculum there? So the curriculum,
a couple of things have to happen. One, what you seek to do is move from a school as an administrative unit. Why are we all sitting in the same room? Why are you working in school libraries and you're working in academic libraries and I'm over doing data mining, right? That's a school. It's just an administrative shell. We need to move from a school to a school of thought. What that means is, I know why you're fitting together. I know why you're there, because we're seeking to help communities make better decisions. We do that through technology. That involves data. That involves education and literacy. And suddenly we all have a shared understanding of what we're trying to do. That's a really concrete thing to happen. And that is preparing not only librarians, but it's preparing people at the bachelor's level, because we need to prepare the mayors, the provosts, the CIOs, the future board members to support librarians and libraries as well. The curriculum then, we need to, once again, I think we sort of alluded somewhat to this, but it's not, this is cataloging, boom, because it's a known entity and you read the book and you get it. And this is reference and we're going to stack this on top and stack this on top. It's much more integrative. So every course should not only have that sort of symposium sense, this is the field and what goes, but a piece of practice. So one thought, and we're just getting, I have 4 months, give me another 4. What we're already starting to talk about, what if you took, let's pick reference. You take the reference course, and yes, there are things you need to know about question negotiation, resources, et cetera. 2 weeks, somewhere in there, you're actually going to go and answer reference questions. And since you're interested in music librarianship, we have a relationship, go into the music library. If you're interested in history, here's a great place for history. If you're interested in engineering, and then come back and let's share what we learned. And now we teach you, now it's time for information organization, cataloging, and metadata. 2 weeks, somewhere in there, you're going to be describing and working on metadata schemas and working on digital library in, once again, you like music, in a music context. By the time you're done, you have a lot of what we know librarians need to know around information organization, community outreach, and access technology. But you already have a great amount of experience in a given area that you can then take forward. And everyone else has benefited from real practice and talking about, so then the professor says, well, on page 38 it says, and they say, not so much in music. You know, it changes that conversation. So the curriculum is not so much, yes, we need to talk about what's core. We need more instruction. We need more community outreach and communication skills and what is facilitation. But it really is a matter of how it's delivered. And the delivery involves the precious new ideas. And those come not only from the faculty member, but from the alumni and the practice experience as well. And constantly coming and having that conversation. You know, I think there's some fear as ALA has changed its accreditation standards. And when it did that, it changed in the 90s from, you know, you must have so many faculty must be on your staff with library science. We understood at the time. I'm much more worried that if I have X percentage of people with library science, they're going to bank on those skills for a 20-year career. That scares me much more than have they ever worked in a library. I'm much more interested in someone without a library science degree who spends a lot of time worrying about, thinking about, working with, understanding, and building library services today. And so that means the students and the faculty and the alumni and the staff all are around that idea of learning. And whether you work in a library or you're coming back and going, oh, did you know that's the same thing in Google? Did you know that's the same thing in IBM or et cetera? That's the kind of conversation. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, is the school is a conversation about what's going on, where are we going, how do we get there.
Since the conference is focuses often on collection development, acquisitions issues, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you where those areas of librarianship and information studies fits into a curriculum.
You know, on one hand, I've done a lot of writing and working about libraries and conversations and community outreach, and I think some people read that as a lack of emphasis, shift of emphasis, downplaying the importance of collections and such. And it's not true. I mean, for example, my first book, I started talking about books and articles and journals as artifacts, and I got a lot of people like, whoa, we don't deal with artifacts. And I'm like, seriously? Yes, you do, because they're tools. They're amazingly powerful, incredible tools that have lifted mankind out of the dark ages and into the light. I mean, it's an amazing tool, but it's still a tool, because it's the people who wrote that book and what the people who read that book do with it and how they use it, interpret it, and understand it, the value they associate with it, that is the true impact that we want to have. Quick example. Beverly Kennedy at Cazenovia Public Library in upstate New York. Tiny little library in a really rich enclave, but in one of the poorest counties in New York. She began realizing that we need to do service outside the library. There's a food pantry. Lots of people come into the food pantry. Let's go. We'll work with them. And we'll do story times and reading, etc. At one point, what she did was she began to give each kid a new book. And she handed this book to this young child, this girl who began to cry. And Beverly said, so what's the matter? What's wrong? And the girl looked up at her and said, this is the first new thing I have ever owned. That book, the power of that book, was in status and recognition of that individual. The power of a book on physics is in the next invention of physics. The power of the book of medicine is the doctor that it helps who cures a cancer, et cetera. That tool becomes central to the conversation and part of the platform. But our focus needs to be, and it's always been, but this is just a matter of us yelling a little louder, saying, let's look at how these are used, what the impact they have. So we're not worried about do we have everything. What we're worried about is do we have the right things, and that's defined not by some grand scheme, but by what does our community need and how do they view it. The other part of it, which I think is fabulous, is that the field of, call it collections, call it technical services, this is probably the most radically changed part of librarianship over the past quarter century, and we haven't even noticed it. If right now we've gone from stuff we own to stuff we own and license to stuff we own and license and can access on the internet and digital items we create and now emulation software and tools. If you look at what a collection for a library is, it is nothing like it was 30 and 50 years
It's
ago.
incredibly expanded. The notion of collections is incredibly
And
expanded.
it's not just expanded, it's fundamentally changed the view. We had to take librarians who are trained to own, right? You even hear the echoes of it still with persistent access and collecting for eternity, right? This idea, and we've made them comfortable. No, let me rephrase that. They have become comfortable with a hybrid environment with certain things that, yes, are eternity and certain things that are tomorrow and certain things that were yesterday. Now, you look at the other side, public service and outreach and reference. It's still what can a reference librarian do, right? What program can they put on? Why are public libraries so bad at STEM education? Because there are so few public librarians with STEM backgrounds. And the idea of pushing them to think of the community as the collection is to bring that hybrid idea that took so long and brilliant and amazing work in librarianship and bring it all the way through the profession. You know, some people say, well, Dave, you're trying to put reference in technical. I'm trying to take technical services and put in reference. It's the idea that if the community is your collection, we have to do collection development. We have to do organization, but we also have to give up control. We have to realize that we don't have to own everything that happens in the library function. So
Well, promoting access becomes as important as ownership.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think so.
Well, looking ahead, so what does the emphasis on this evolving type of education say about our future, about the future of libraries? I mean, what can we look forward to? And maybe not just libraries as a space or as a place for librarians, but I mean, what does this say about our content providers and publishers? What does this mean for them?
You know, I think moving forward, it's good news. We're searching for 4 positions. One of them is an instructor position in technology, and I had a friend of mine, another university, push back with, this reads so traditionally. You need to do cooler stuff with tech and bring whatever. And I said, it does read traditionally. And I said, that actually is on purpose, which is, my interest is not what's new and shiny. My interest isn't, okay, today it's data science, let's go find a data scientist. And tomorrow it's going to be, it was usability and user experience, and now it's data science, and tomorrow will be virtual and augmented reality, and there will be a trend. And I said, those aren't unimportant. And it's not that we don't want students prepared for it. But what we need to understand is there are fundamentals that say this is why it's important. So we can have all the virtual reality you want, but if what we're doing is providing virtual experiences to minority youth and underserved populations that reflect a majority view, it's the same thing as not serving them well in the public library. It's the same thing as not collecting materials in the school library. It's the same thing of excluding them from cost of higher education, which is if we have a social function to play, we had to play it in the new technology realms, and that comes from our core tradition. So for me, what is very exciting, what it says about libraries and library science and information science, because I want them to be the same thing. They're not often, but I want them to be the same thing. And that's why the knowledge word here is because I think it's both. Is the fact that as we move forward, we have a 4 millennia tradition that we can build off of, that important, that it's durable. And so for me, what it says is we think about the knowledge wheel and what's exciting with impact and social impact and making a change, and not just writing a great study that gets in great publications that gets us a wonderful recognition by a provost, but going out there and doing it. What it says is it's more vibrant than ever. Example. So last year in October in Columbia, South Carolina, there was a 1,000-year flood. what happens is there was so much rainfall in a short amount of time. What it began doing was not only overflowing rivers were cresty and such. There's a huge undiscovered, unregulated world of dams, right? So people would come in and they wanted to build a beautiful real estate and charge a lot of money for the homes. They dam up the creek. Suddenly you have a little lake and it's pretty. And they weren't regulated. They weren't necessarily up to code. And so what happened with all this rainfall is it began a cascading effect where one of these dams that dammed up a creek suddenly released to a next one that dammed up a creek that suddenly you had a huge flood. The University of South Carolina, which I'm amazingly impressed, and I can say that as a new person, not just trying to be, my alma mater, looked and said, what do we as a university do in this? How do we figure out how to learn from this situation? Gave out a series of grants going, think about this. And our school got a number of grants to look at public libraries in the flooding. What happened? For example, when FEMA came in to figure out how they were going to do disaster release and recovery, they set up in public libraries. Not just because they were there, but they were there in each community. They were open and people knew about them, right? And they realized that when that flooding occurred, people needed basic health information like don't go into the water because it's not just pretty pond water, it's also overflowing all our sewage treatment plants. And, things like that. Even environmental conditions, there are stories that people were in their house and the house wasn't flooded because it was up on a slight hillock, but there was water all around it. Full of water moccasins. Honest to God, I live in a place where there are water moccasins now. But, how do we inform them? People with disabilities. When the Hurricane Matthew came through, they had to evacuate people from Charleston and the coast. How does that work when someone's homebound? How does that work for folks in wheelchairs? How does that work for people with conditions where they need extra support? And our faculty went out and studied it. And didn't just study it. They began to say, this is what you can do, and here you can build this service, and this is how we can contribute here. And began things like, we have a project where we're working with our GIS and our medical school on mapping the university setting for people with mobility issues. Because, for example, there are places where you can get down into a place and not back out because they haven't thought that far through. Where are the machines, or where are the doors that have automatic openers, and which aren't working, and how can we report back to it? That's good methods, qualitative methods. We're going to now do a follow-up for Hurricane Matthew because there was additional flooding and horrible things. We can now go and do replicate some of those same studies and have that same question. And then develop policies and procedures and actions. And so what that comes from is, it's back to the social actions, back to making a difference. What we want to do is not only study the world and document the world, but help it. The University of South Carolina is an R1 ranked Carnegie Research Institution. That's good. It's important. We do good science. It is also one of the few R1 Carnegie institutions that Carnegie is also ranked as one having community outreach and impact. That it is a scholarship in action. It is not just good and brilliant scholarship and research and things that get us tenure. It's in action, so it improves the communities of which we are part of.
It also serves as a model for other libraries and other places that experience natural disasters. I mean, it's excellent research model to be replicated to figure out the same issues.
In Louisiana with the flooding, they were very supportive. The state of Louisiana was very supportive when we had our flooding. We did book drives to send materials back. Now, frankly, you sit there and go, book drives, come on, how unsexy are book drives? Book drives, when you are a school library and that is literally all the access you have materials, is essential. Book drives that not only what books had left over, but worry about things like diverse classes and meeting cultural norms and helping people educate. And with the work that we've done here and to expand to Louisiana is, and by the way, here are the things you need to know. Here's what public libraries can do to support it. Do you have these kinds of plans in place? And so we can support that out of the goodness of our heart, but we can also support it with our heads to say, and this is how you can use this experience to move forward. We've had, unfortunately, a lot of crises that public libraries have played a role in civil unrest, in the areas of race, in the areas of religion, and in natural disaster. And what I love about this is iSchool, Knowledge School, Library School, schools, particularly in our field, if what we're trying to do is help communities make smarter decisions, they need to be healthy communities, they need to be vibrant communities, they need to be caring communities, all of these things, working with education and social work and nursing, etc. we have the ability to say, this is how you can help your community in crisis, and we can begin to bring that together and learn from it. And so that's what I'm hoping the Knowledge School does. Is not simply, I mean, it's a great marketing scheme for us, thank you for the opportunity, but it really is an attempt to have a field-wide conversation going, you know what, libraries are important. We don't need to play that game. Libraries are doing, they're not doing perfectly, but they're doing better than they used to, and they really have a community theme. It's a role going on. You listen to this conference around open access and the idea of access and the importance of access. Libraries are doing well in this country. How do we then look at, we understand information technology. That businesses now acknowledge that information is an asset that needs to be managed, that has skills, that has resources, data is important, so we've done. The next one is, okay, let's put those together and talk about how do we make a better world. And that activism is what drew me into the profession to begin with. It's what draws students in. It's how we're trying to attract faculty. And it is just so much more satisfying to go and learn, because we learn every single day. As a faculty member, as a student, as an alumni, as a staff member, as a human being, we learn every day to go into a place and say, yes, I just learned and you fed my mind, feed my soul. How do I take this and go and make things better? And I see it. We take football players, and we take kids from every discipline, accounting and business and visual arts, and we put them on a bus and we drive them around South Carolina called Cocky's Reading Express. And Cocky, who's the mascot, shows up, and so all these kids, young kids, show up because they're thrilled. They each get a new book, big deal. But they each get a new book. We've already talked about the power of that.
That is a big deal.
And that book is culturally appropriate, right? Because if you're a poor urban black kid, or a poor urban Hispanic kid, or a poor urban white kid, it matters. The urban part matters. It matters that you see yourself in this literature. You're seeing that education is important by the mascot and the people you love, and I want to play football, and why they care about reading. And then their parents come, and we talk to them about health information, and we do food, and we talk about a culture of literacy that is not only the librarian and the teacher, but the pizza guy and the policeman, and bring those folks together. That's where this field, where librarianship has always made an impact, whether that's in exploring civil rights in a higher education context, or moving social justice in sociology. Libraries have played a role in activism, and it's one that I think we should be very proud of, and it's one that I think sits at the forefront of what we're talking about.
That's really impressive, and I will say I also got into librarianship because of this feeling that I wanted to make a difference, but I don't think I knew it at first. And I wonder if that's, I guess that if I asked a lot of my friends and colleagues, we would all say something similar. There was something driving me toward this, and I didn't know what it was until I started to see that it was about making a difference.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's in it for the money.
Yeah, right.
The
illustrious fame.
I had this student who came to me, and she said, so in Syracuse we teach this week-long course, in 9 to 5 intensive course, and they would get a healthy dose of helping common man. And this librarian came to me on the second day, and she goes, library student, I didn't think this was for me. After clearly my teaching style, but all this community outreach and stuff, and no. But it's all right. Last night I went to group advising, and they introduced me to the world of cataloging and technical services, and so now I realize that I can have a role to play in libraries without accessing the community. I went, oh, you are about to have a really bad 2 years, because you misunderstood. And we see that all the time, and it's true. The first year of library science program is this series of expectations and breaking them down, which usually leads to this mid-year depression, and then building them back up. You came in to read, you'll never have time. You came in not to talk to people, it's essential to what you do. Yes. You came in because you don't love technology, good luck with that. And this mid-year, they're all sitting around going, so why are we here? And you go, whoa, wait, I can make the world a better place. Oh, the service is what I cared about. Oh, it's going to be in conjunction with the community, working with it and teaching it. And so you give them the true heart of librarianship, values. Why do we care about privacy? Because we care that communities can be smarter without having people over their shoulder. Why do we care about balanced information and intellectual honesty? Because we've seen areas, we're seeing it right now, where if communities ignore different forms of information, they make bad decisions. Right? And they say, you're right. That is what I care about. That is what I want to do with. And so I think you're right. I think that's, when I look at the great librarians we have in our field, when I look at the great people we have in our field, they're all people who want to make a difference.
Thanks.
Did you?
Oh, so a bit of a shift here. What I'm hearing a lot at the conference so far, and what I've been kind of hearing buzzing around, in the air of librarianship lately, is a lot about how are we going to add value, right? So our roles are changing. Especially in academia, those of us who work in academic libraries, our established value proposition to our stakeholders, to our users, our faculty and staff and students, that's going to change, because what we're doing on a day-to-day basis and what we are focusing on now is shifting pretty radically in a lot of ways. Not like it hasn't always, but right now it just seems more prescient. So if we are indeed going to need to kind of rethink our value proposition, where do you see, and you've already kind of been hitting on this, but maybe where else do you see our value proposition? How are we going to add value in the 21st century?
And the short answer is librarians. I mean, and the longer answer is, we've thought for a long time that the library as organization, as collection, the idea of being able to make bulk purchases, and the idea of a single licensing entity for a university, the idea of preservation and collection over time, a lot of the value that we talked about adding was around the materials, access to materials, and the economy of access to the materials. Economy either in how we afford them, but even economy of time, right? So we talk to a good reference librarian that can save you time. That was our value, was that we could save you time, we could save you money, we could save you value, and we could put it all together and save things for duration. What we're realizing is that it is still saving you time. It's saving, the scarcity is not access to the resources, materials. This is so trite at this point, but the scarcity is now in our attention. So our value saving time. But librarians are going to do that through education, going to do that through selection, going to do that through facilitation, going to do that by bringing and networking people together. Quick story, I have lots of them, I apologize, but working with a group, and were working with, let's just say, a large urban library, and they wanted to implement a sort of maker space before, that's what we called it. So this is maybe 10 years ago, not even quite. And so I worked with this library. The library identified this underused space. It was more or less a big storage room, probably twice as big as this suite, but not much more. Cleaned it out and said, "Go, do what you want with it." And so they had computers over here for media production, and they had lots of experiences. And they roll out the plans to librarians, and they say, "Well, we're ready to go. What do you think? Sign off on the plans." And the librarian said, "Well, where are the books?" And the researchers came to me later, and they go, "The building's full of books." Right? It's not like if people are in this line, they somehow missed the fact that their materials are right. They said, "We don't understand. What's going on here?" And I said, "Well, when looking at it, when talking with them, and looking at the situation, talking with the librarians, what they were really saying is, where are we? Where are we librarians?" And at the time, the vocabulary was collection oriented. So what they meant was, where are we? But the only way they could say that is, we are the collections, we are, this manifestation. The value clearly is in the materials that we bring together and the way we bring them together, not us. And the researchers were saying, we want you in here. We need people to sit down with the kids who are coming in to help them with technology and doing tutorials. We need you to help organize events and connect people so that when they're talking together. In other words, the value that the researchers saw was that being added were the librarians using their skills of facilitation, saving people time, but creating opportunities. And yes, the books and materials, they're the tools we use to do it, but these days it's also the classes we offer and the literacy courses and the MOOCs we put together and the licensing agreements and the instruction we do one-on-one, right? That's still the value of helping people make better decisions in a more economical way, in a more effective way. But the tools change. So in some ways, yes, the means of what we're doing are changing. But the reason we're doing it has, for me, it's a 4,000-year-long tradition of learning, of knowledge. Knowledge not as stuff, knowledge not as something you can put in paper, but knowledge is in what do we know and how do we impact the society that we're in. And I find that much more interesting. And the one trick that I found over and over again, the one stumbling block, is that when a librarian moves to that role of truly facilitating, when they see themselves as the value add, they become an instrument, right? So in research, we do this all the time. If you're going and you're doing an interview, who you are, your view, your background influences this interview, right? The et cetera, it's all in there. That means you have to worry about yourself. You have to understand, what is my role? What do I care? What do I believe in? And it becomes very reflective, and that can be extraordinarily uncomfortable, right? That idea that when it was me picking the books and materials, all the attention was over there. Now all the attention's here. And I got to spend a lot of time going, am I worth this attention? This isn't an introvert-extrovert thing. This is quite literally, am I comfortable saying that my expertise is important enough that I have to make you aware of it, right? I've heard so many times librarians go, if I do my job right, you never know I'm there. That's not adding value, right? If I know that I have a brilliant, great librarian, I'm going to go back to that person again and again. But that means that that librarian has to be willing to step up and have that expertise challenged, to say their opinions, materials, be reflective about it. And that's something that, back to your curriculum question, we need to do a lot of sort of how to be a professional in this new environment. You talk about leadership skills, we talk about communication skills, but it really comes, how are we a reflective practitioners that we understand our value, can express that value, and put that in front of people. And that sounds abstract, but it turns into things like getting rid of reference desks and doing roving reference. It talks about sending librarians into business settings where they are part of teams. It looks at the idea of embedded librarianship in data and research. It comes from the idea that I'm doing this huge research, I need someone to help me with it, I need the librarian. I don't need your materials and books, I got more than I can deal with, I need you. And by doing that, what we're really doing is we're asking librarians to step out. We're asking any professional to step out. And now, one of the things with my great 4 months of being a Southerner, Southerners don't like to brag about themselves. And I keep saying, it's not bragging if it's true. That idea of understanding your role, your impact, and your value, it's not bragging, it's having the confidence to do the work that needs to be done and to be recognized for doing it. Jim also talked about, our keynote also talked about power. Power is something that you need to go and get. Yes, to distribute it, to do good things in the world, but Saul Alinsky said power in itself is not inherently evil. We like to think of it as. But if you are in the empowerment business and you want to empower people, the root of that word is power. You can't give people power unless you have it yourself. Now, that power could be the power of reading. That power could be the power of pleasure reading. That power can be, I had someone come up to me and say, we don't talk enough about reading for recreation. Why not? Because that's what a lot of libraries do. Understand that reading for recreation itself, while it sounds like it, why everyone would agree, and of course it's a neutral idea, everyone should read more. If you have time to read, if you have time to sit quietly and read a book, that's a luxury for people. That's a luxury that for people who don't earn a living wage, the pleasure of reading is a luxury they can't afford. And so if we're going to promote the power or pleasure of reading, we better promote social equity to make sure that you have the time and wages to do it. We better make sure that you have access to equitable access to the materials. Back to advocacy, back to what we teach in the curriculum, and back to books don't advocate, librarians advocate. People do that.
David, this has been great. But in the interest of not missing anything, we were wondering if you could put yourselves in our chairs, and if you were to do that, what question would you ask yourself?
Goodness. Oh boy, now it turns to therapy.
You wanted self-reflection.
I wanted self-reflection.
We're empowering you.
The hardest question that I still wrestle with to this day, which is, as you say, when you talk at the abstract level, it sounds lovely and it sounds interesting, and talk about advocacy. The hardest question is, okay, let's buy it. Let's buy the knowledge is how people think. Let's buy the fact that librarians need to facilitate this. Let's buy the empowerment argument. Let's buy advocacy. Let's buy it all. What do you do when you're serving a community in conflict? And the idea being, I used to think of and talk about communities as this sort of utopian idea. Well, we're all a community, right? We all share something in common. We live in Charleston, we're a community. We work for this, we're a community. And Brian Butler, actually, University of Maryland, put this to me. He studies online communities. He said, communities, yes, have this common variable, but they also have must allocate limited resources. Time, money, effort, real estate, whatever. Are you going to tear down that old building and put a new one up? Are you going to spend this tax money here? Are you going to spend this tuition dollar here? How do you continue to be an honest, effective advocate, facilitator, and professional when there are deep, honest, well-held conflict in your community? You know, why should we, you know, we say this all the time, libraries are great, but why should I take Columbia, 1,000-year flood? You know what Columbia needs right now? More librarians. You know what else it needs right now? Better roads, better dams. You know, and it's kind of hard to argue for that. You know, it's great to say that our university library is going to provide tutoring services, but shouldn't our academics be better instructors? You know, those are problems as well. What do you do when you're dealing with a political discussion, when you have two mayoral candidates? It's not just that, oh, honest people talk, but as we're seeing at the presidential level, no, this is nasty. And where you fall on them is much less of their policy and much more of what you think they represent. So how do you serve a community where you got 50% Hillarys and 50% Trumps, or 10% Hillarys and 90% Trumps? How do you honestly work in that spectrum? And so the question I always come back to, and the one I struggle with to this day, is, all right, Dave, this all sounds great, but when you put it on the ground, help me make that hard decision. And I have ideas and ways, and some of the ideas I put out, many people don't like, and some do like them. And when it gets to brass tacks, how do you function in a highly polarized environment and remain community oriented? That's the hard question, and that's the one that I unfortunately can't answer. So I thank you for putting it so that I could ask it and not answer it.
Well, maybe in another interview.
Maybe, yeah, next year. I'll have it done by next year.
It's a great question, though, and it's good food for thought, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, David. We really have enjoyed the opportunity to chat with you, and I've learned a lot.
Me too.
Yeah. It's been great.
Well, and please take this as an invitation to come to Columbia and help us figure this out as well. So.
All right.